This next one's cool. This is one I've been really looking forward to. This is the News Discovery panel. Right now, you're going to get to meet some of the people who are undermining the very business upon which my livelihood depends. So looking forward to seeing these guys. Let's bring up Chris Taylor, deputy editor of Mashable. There's Chris. He's going to be our moderator. And along with him, we have Andy Mitchell, director of strategic partnerships for Facebook, Akshay Kothari, the founder of Pulse, Adrian Aoun, CEO of Wavii, and Mark Johnson, CEO of Zite.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the News Discovery panel. I'm really excited about this one because I discover a lot of my news through these guys and various other social media sources. And the sources with which we discover news have changed dramatically in the last decade or so. Certainly for me, and I know for you guys personally. And that's the question I wanted to start off with. Is I was hoping you guys could talk about how you used to discover news like 5-10 years ago, and then how you discover news now with only the tiniest of plugs for your own companies. So, Mark, you wanna start off?
I mean, I've been a news junkie for a long time, so I used to type in a lot of URLs, and the only URL I usually type in these days is news.com, just because it's habit. I just go there every day. But at some point, that habit will disappear. I mean, a lot of the news I get is on IM from friends. I get it on Facebook, on Twitter. I use Flipboard sometimes to see it. I obviously use Zite a lot. But I just feel like I'm consuming news all the time now. It's kind of hard to point a finger at one single thing that gives me most of my news.
All right, Adrian.
Yeah, so I think, at least for me personally, the way I consume news has changed in, I really think, 3 distinct steps over time. The original step was the very classic, I read a newspaper, right? So I choose some source and it gives me all of the information that I need. And kind of that evolved into the social pointing you to particular parts of that source. So in other words, a friend would email me an article or somebody would tweet out an article. And now much more what's happening, I think, across many services is you're using social to not point you to an article so much as to point you to a story, to point you towards something that happened. And so you see a lot of these services now, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's via any one of the social channels that we use, Twitter, et cetera, that are pushing me towards, oh my God, Barack Obama is, for or against SOPA, or Barack Obama did this, or Kim Kardashian did this. And really what I'm seeing is changed is that the emphasis is no longer on the source so much as it's on what's happening, and people are pointing you straight to that piece of information. So for me, the beauty of that is that my news consumption is now so much faster and so much more targeted. We've kind of gotten rid of all this cruft.
Mm. All right, Akshay.
Yeah, so I think I agree with what's been said, but I actually I grew up in India, and so I feel like I skipped the internet, and I kind of went from reading newspaper directly to mobile. And so 10 years ago, I feel like the way I used to get my news was get up in the morning and read the entire newspaper from the front page to the last page, and that was it. That was kind of all the news I read, and then I would go to high school and I would talk about what happened in person with those people. And I feel like today, that activity has changed a lot. So now if I look at my news reading habits, it's actually at specific times during the day. I'm actually, any given day, I'm probably looking at news about 5 or 7 times. So it's not that one particular time that I read my news from one source. It's actually from a variety of sources, from a variety of different channels that I'm actually getting my news. And this is something that we're actually seeing in Pulse as well, that there's a spike of activity at 8 a.m., there's a spike of activity at noon. When people leave from work from 5 to 7, there's a spike of activity. And then for tablets, 8 p.m. onwards till midnight, there's a huge amount of news reading happening. And so what we used to do in the morning, kind of reading newspapers now, is spread over the day from different sources that you get.
All right. And Andy, I believe you have the weirdest source of news discovery.
So I've already been ridiculed by my fellow panelists, but I still read newspapers. I appreciate the fact, thank you very much. I wake up in the morning and I like the fact that I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every morning. I like the fact that the news has had a chance to breathe and be curated by somebody who looks at the whole landscape of the different topics of what's going on. During the course of the day, obviously I spend a lot of time on Facebook, so I get a lot of news, both from my friends and also from news organizations that I follow. And then in the evening, following the consumptions that were mentioned, I'd spend a lot more time with, music news and lifestyle and things like that. So I think I'm a kind of a hybrid of all these guys. But I'm proud to still be a newspaper reader.
Are you like the only guy at Facebook who takes newspapers?
Well, I'm first of all the oldest person who works at Facebook, so there's that awkwardness. So I walked in my first day after orientation carrying 2 newspapers, and I couldn't figure out why everybody was looking at me funny. So I don't bring them to work anymore. I read them before the day starts.
So we kind of, in your companies, and this is the question where you guys get to talk about your companies a little bit. You kind of run the gamut of news discovery from, social discovery, like what my Facebook friends have posted, which is a frequent source of news for me, I should say. Twitter has not been that well represented on this panel. That's probably the number one source of discovery for me during the day. So, from your Facebook friends' posts all the way to, the algorithm deciding how what news you like, what kind of news it should feed you. Obviously you guys have your own biases, but, if you were to talk in an unbiased fashion for a while, which of these sources of the future? Are my friends going to show me all of the news that I want? Is it going to be the algorithm knowing the news I want to read before I've even, picked up my tablet in the morning? Or is it a hybrid of both? Adrian?
I'll start. So I actually think that Aiden Sinkett said this best earlier, which is to say, is a company going to be mobile? Is a company going to be social? Is a company going to be big data? Is just kind of ridiculous in this day and age. I really feel like 99% of what we're doing up here, all of our companies, have elements of all. To say that Facebook isn't using algorithms and curations, obviously ridiculous. To say that social is not applicable to certain types of news is probably fairly ridiculous. So I think the best question there is not, is it going to be one or the other, but more, how are they going to combine? And, the truth is, if you look at it as a scale, some people are using a little more social, a little less algorithms. Some people are using, and that would probably be Facebook. And Pulse is probably using a little more algorithms, a little less social at the end of the day. But at least for what we're trying to do at Wavii, we don't really want to choose between one of those. We think that each one of those is, at the end of the day, a signal that has actual, valuable information for targeting information to users.
I think, whereas that's true, I think the CEO of Pandora said it very well earlier that focus is very important, and we're hyper focused on the algorithm, and though there's a lot of social behind that algorithm, that social data of people sharing and telling us what they like implicitly via Twitter and Facebook and all the other places people share things is incredibly useful for the algorithm. But we don't necessarily put that out front because we are hyper focused on that. But I agree in the long term that this will all blend together, and news discovery will happen socially, algorithmically, everywhere, and it's going to be fairly opaque to the user what's going on in the back end.
I think people will wind up choosing what they're most comfortable with and where they want to get information. So some people just want to get information from their friends. Some people don't really care what their friends have to say and just want to get information from, through an algorithm. So I think it's ultimately going to be a personal decision.
Yeah, I think there's discovery of news sources and there's discovery of articles. I think Andy said that he's reading New York Times and Wall Street Journal for a while. And so I think there are these trusted sources that you do want to subscribe to and you do want to read them on a daily basis, which Pulse provides. And then there's discovery of articles, which is actually, it's a tough problem to actually figure out what are the interesting articles that you want to read. And that discovery can come from a lot of different places, whether it's coming from Twitter of the people you're following, or whether it's coming from Facebook of the people, what they're reading. That's, I think, going to be an interesting trend that we'll see in the next couple of years in terms of how different companies break that down. But I think with the way I see the future, I think it's going to be a combination of what you personally interested in and what you follow, what you trust, as well as discovery of interesting articles that pop up from your friends' activity.
So you guys are all trying different business models, basically, along this spectrum at the moment, and it kind of feels like you're all sort of feeling your way out. And I think probably the most prominent discovery tool in the last year would be the social reader, and that the way that the readership evolved and changed depending on the design of the page. I wondered, Andy, if you could talk a little bit about that, about what Facebook learned from the social reader experience.
I would say learning. So we're very, very early stages of Open Graph and how people are going to discover news through what their friends read. And it's very early stages. We've seen a very quick evolution over the past few months as it is. So stories are being represented differently in newsfeed. We're continuing to work with our developers. Last week, actually, we announced a series of new requirements for developers, so they have to have a 10-second delay before they publish a read so that we're confident that a person has actually consumed a decent amount of a story. We've another requirement so that developers have to have a way for people to X out that read directly on that story. So if they land on a story, they forgot that they were sharing what they read. That's very prominent on the page, and they can stop sharing from there. So that will take effect. It's a 90-day break, what we refer to as a 90-day breaking change. So we give developers 90 days to make the change. So you'll start to see that happen in the ecosystem of Open Graph developers, in the next few months. And then there are a lot of changes in the pipeline that we're testing to a very small amount of users to ultimately get to a place where it's a great experience and we're delivering value to our developers and also a great experience for users. And that's the mix that we're really struggling and working very hard to achieve.
It seemed like, just to follow up on that, it seemed like at the beginning there was an assumption that people wanted to share the news that they were reading. And then you guys gradually dialed that back and it was like, okay, users don't actually want every lifestyle article in the Washington Post to be flagged on their timeline. Is that a fair?
I mean, you have to start somewhere, and I think that's one thing we're very good at as a company is starting somewhere and iterating very quickly. And again, the Open Graph it's only been about 6 months or 8 months since it's been out, and it's changed significantly since the start, and will continue to change. So yeah, I mean, we certainly had a series of assumptions, and then very quickly looked at the data and listened to people and listened to developers and are iterating the product.
I would say if there were really, really good algorithmic curation, then people would be more willing to share everything. So if you were to share everything and then your friends would only see those things that would really interest them, I think that people would be more willing to share. I mean, I think the problem isn't in the sharing itself right now. It's in how it's displayed to everybody. I don't want to see the probably tens of thousands of articles that are read on a weekly basis by my friends, but I would love to see those 100 articles that are really interesting to me and meaningful to me. Meaningful to me maybe because my mother read it, or meaningful to me because it's a topic I'm really interested in. And I think that's really the challenge here: is how do you select from these tens of thousands to the few that I actually want to read?
So I actually, to pile onto that, I completely agree. Though I take a different spin on it. I think that Facebook is in this really interesting scenario where 90% of my feed items do what I think of as completing the story. They tell me exactly what happened. Person was tagged in a photo, person checked into a location, person tells me they're dating. And then all of a sudden I get this kind of funny looking item that's a big blob of text. And it's a headline and it says somebody read this. And unfortunately, I now have to click and dive in to even find out what was happening there, right? Mm. And so my issue at the end of the day is not so much should we curate them down to the 100 I'm willing to read, but more, can we go past that? Can we do something where we represent the information that your friends are interacting with? So that if you're reading an article about Facebook IPO, and I'm reading an article about the Facebook IPO, but as it turns out they're two entirely different articles, the truth is we're reading the same thing. There's an enormous amount of duplication. So can we kind of centralize this around Chris is reading about the Facebook IPO, or something kind of more concrete for me?
I think building on that, I think one thing I completely agree that I think the context switching that happens on Facebook is tough, because suddenly you're reading about your friend's activity and you see The other thing I think that we put a lot of emphasis in terms of what your friends are reading. It actually, like, it's not entirely, like, really, really good sometimes. Like, a lot of things that you're going to see on Facebook is actually, like, sensationalist news that a lot of people are clicking through or a lot of people reading, right? And that may not be, like, the thing that you really, really enjoy or the thing that you really are interested in. So just looking at your friend's graph and what they're reading may not be the exact thing, because you do have to tell what you're personally interested in. And I think there is a subtle difference between the two.
I couldn't agree more. I actually think that over time, right now what we do is we approximate our interests via sources, right? So I don't go to Twitter and say, I want to follow iPhone. I go to Twitter and say, I want to follow MG Siegler, because odds are I might get some good iPhone news, right? And so what we are right now, if you look at the discovery prospects or the discovery aspects of news, is we are the union of what your friends care about and what you care about. And I'd much prefer personally that we're the intersection. So I define my interests, and then I get my friends' reactions and my friends' comments and my friends' interactions with those interests. So that if I'm following you and you're interested in baseball and I'm not, but you're interested in tech and I am, I get you in tech, but I don't have to put up with the baseball.
So I just wanted to follow up, Mark. You made what seemed like a pretty provocative statement that if we got the algorithm right, if we basically got the stories that were right for you, you'd be fine sharing all of them. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So, I mean, is there no room here? I mean, maybe this is a difference between, I don't know, how engineers read news, but is there no room here for, like, the guilty pleasure stories? I mean, maybe I secretly have, a desire to read about Kim Kardashian, and I don't want the world or my employer to know about it.
I know people always talk about these guilty pleasures like Aoun and Kim Kardashian, but then they tweet about it all the time. Like I'm not sure how guilty people actually feel about these pleasures. I think that a lot of noise is made about that, but then you see people sharing this on Twitter and Facebook all the time. So sure, maybe you need a way to curate that, maybe you need a way to stop it, but people said the same thing about party pictures on Facebook. Well, everybody posts party pictures on Facebook now. Like, is that really a big problem? I just wonder about this.
Well, maybe we can find out with a quick show of hands right here. Hands up, everyone who is fine with every story they've read in the last week being shared on Facebook. A smattering of
What are you
hands.
people reading? What don't you want us to know?
Right, yeah. I mean, there's also the research angle. Is like,
Yeah, but I think everybody's doing research in different ways, sometimes for their job, sometimes about a disease they, have, or the neurotic people like me, they think they have, or they're sure they have. And so I think that everybody, that's why ultimately what we're trying to do is give as much control to people, and so that if they have agreed to share in a certain site at the article level, they can decide not to share that story because it's not something they want to share with their friends.
So we have for you, Andy, a number of questions coming in on Twitter, and two of them already are about Facebook. First of all, it should be a quick one. Why do I have to install the social reader on Facebook? It makes me have to Google the story so I don't have to share it with my friends.
You don't have to. You can decline to auth the app and find your news elsewhere.
All right. That was a quick one. Follow up. How do you think the open graph will change news discovery?
I think I don't know if it'll change it so much as it will just, I think somebody said it earlier this morning, the guy from Pandora said it, it's that really what Facebook does and social media in general is it reflects what happens in the real world, and it's a modern way of what happened in the past, right? So we would see our friends at school or wherever we'd see, and they would say, have you read this or have you seen this? And it's just the same. It's the same sensibility brought to social media and brought online.
It's the water cooler, basically.
Yeah,
you've taken the water cooler and you've Facebooked it.
It just happens faster and at scale, but it's the same behavior.
Adrian?
So I actually think there's something a little more nuanced, but maybe even more exciting about what Facebook's doing with Open Graph. And this comes to the point that I've been somewhat driving home earlier too, which is right now Open Graph allows me to say, person read X article. And that's a fairly opaque piece of information for Facebook. They know that it's an article. There's maybe not that much information about what that article is. But Open Graph allows, in other contexts, much more definitive information, right? Like you checked into a location with a person, et cetera. And in that case, they know it's a restaurant. They know what you do at these locations. Or you listen to a particular song, which is part of an album by a certain artist, right? So there's much more information. So what I'm hoping over time is that news evolves into this much more granular information as well, as I was alluding to earlier, where I think Facebook has a huge opportunity right now to actually put the events of the world into their feed in the same format that they put the events of your friends, so that it's not me clicking off all the time.
So Adrian, you said something earlier, and it sort of segues into the question every upstanding journalist has to ask on a panel like this, which is, we're heading into this world where, as you suggested, the source matters less and less, and what matters is sort of aggregating that news. Well, I kind of have to say the source does matter, right? And it does. If I'm getting a political story from Talking Points Memo, if I'm getting it from Breitbart.com, it's going to be hugely different. So how does the source go away in this world?
So I actually think that right now journalists do 3 jobs, and I'd like to somewhat delineate those jobs and make it clear to the user which is being done at what point in time. And so I think those 3 jobs are reporting what happened, giving context around what happened, and then providing some layer of analysis. And to be fully honest, I don't really care who reported what happened the majority of the time. I care that it happened. So if an earthquake occurs in San Francisco, I'm not sure it matters to me if you reported it or if someone else reported it. The second layer of context, if you say this is the 2nd earthquake this year, I'm not sure I care if you reported it. I think the data exists, and the data can be surfaced via algorithms, et cetera. Where I think journalism, in its truest sense, comes out is providing your analysis. And that's something that I think algorithms aren't going to replace anytime soon, and honestly, I don't want them to. So for you to say, I think this means we should all leave San Francisco and go find some new place to live, or for you to say, this is how it's going to affect things, maybe give predictions, or your overall analysis is your core value. And what I want us to do is get journalists somewhat out of this behavior of, he wrote about something, so I need to write about it too, just to get this kind of, put your voice out there uselessly.
So a number of people have brought this up as well, and Andy, I'll turn to you next, but this whole notion of, how do I avoid the like-minded news? How do I avoid articles that just say, yeah, you're right, that thing that you suspected about, Obama being born in Kenya, yeah, you're right, here's some examples, here's some evidence for you, and we all get siloed off into our little areas of political belief. And I see that happening personally with my own beliefs, I see it happening with friends. Everyone finds their supporting evidence somewhere on the internet. So how do we avoid that? Andy?
I think just going back, I do feel I have to say that you mentioned TPM and Breitbart, and I mean it is a reality that Barack Obama says 2 sentences, and TPM and Breitbart are both going to have a completely different, what they both think and they both claim very strongly are straight reporting on those 2 sentences. So I do think that I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that the source is incredibly important, and then I think that's a good segue to your question about how do you is it a bad thing that again, a reflection of the world that you live in and how things happen in the past. Your friends, probably some of them are like-minded, some of them aren't like-minded. Those people are sharing on Facebook, some of them are sharing from Breitbart, and some of them are sharing from TPM. And so I think that, again, it's just a reflection. Social media is just a reflection of the real world, just faster and at scale.
So nothing we can do about it.
Well, as a person, there's things that you can do about it. Have diverse friends. You can like diverse news sources and get different takes on the same story. So, I think it's really important that we're all taking in a number of facts or facts as reported by people who purport them to be facts, and then synthesize them on your own and form your own opinions. But I do think it's very, very important to have diverse things coming into you.
Actually,
I think this is personally, like, I feel like this is a really strong issue that we should be caring about, which is actually not reading the same kind of news every day and kind of being with the same people who read the same kind of news. And so one of the things we've done actually, and this is something we sometimes get a lot of flack for, is let's say you go into Pulse and you actually add a few politics sources, whether you add CNN or some other sources. We do recommend some things that are actually the exact opposite. We'll recommend you Fox, we'll recommend you Huffington Post, we'll recommend you some other things. And we've gotten a lot of emails about this. We're saying, why are you recommending Fox? Why are you recommending these other things? And I think we do get that, but also we've also gotten emails where people say that, because I've added this, I can now in one place actually see different points of view. So to this example, when Obama says something, you can, actually see all the different perspectives and all the different views that different journalists have. And I think this is an extremely important issue that we should be open to, because what different people feel and what different sides of the table have an opinion on will actually define what you think in the future and what you think about world issues. And so I think at Pulse as well, and for me personally, I think this is something we should all work towards in terms of having a neutral view in terms of what are the different sides, and here's the facts. You can actually make a decision on that.
So yeah. All right, so we're getting close to wrapping up here, but I wanted to ask all of you guys a really provocative question that I think may be true. I mean, you four sort of represent the new kings of journalism, right? I mean, you control access, you control the pipes, you have the social network, you have the apps that we're all going to discover news through, and us poor journalists are just trying to get access to your pipes, right? I mean, the difference in readership of various news sources on Facebook, depending on the slightest tweak in the design of the social reader, is phenomenal. I mean, we've seen the stats on that. So, I mean, do you feel that a certain kind of responsibility comes with this position? Andy, do you want to start?
I mean, I don't work on the feed team, so I can't represent the way they think. But we're an open platform, so anybody is able to build on our APIs and put news into Facebook, and then we are going to try and surface things in a way that we think that you're going to want it. And newsfeed, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about newsfeed is, we may like all the same things, we may have liked all the same articles, we may have all the exact same friends, but based on what we've clicked on in the past, we're each going to get a very unique experience. And so, we are just trying to make sense of all the information that's brought in and present it in a way that we think that you're going to want it.
All right, so you guys have a slightly less developed platform, but hopefully over time, Pulse and Wavii and Zite will get there. So do you have journalists coming crawling to you and saying, please feature my story, my publication?
So we've absolutely had that. And the way we think about it is, and maybe this is the engineers in us, we look at the same problem having occurred with the search engines, right? The search engines are trying to rank content and decide what the user should see. And at the end of the day, they have to make some tough judgment calls and say, we think you're poor content, we think you're a content farm. Well, that person might say, what? I was just creating good content, right? And it's not always as clear as we'd like it to be. I think for us, the important part is over time to let the data and the algorithms do the deciding, as opposed to me going in there and saying, well, okay, Chris's articles are probably a little better than somebody else's articles. But I think the good news here at the end of the day is if you take a step back, it's kind of preposterous to think that people are going to consume their news from one source. And the truth is you get your news from 100 places. I don't care how successful Facebook is. I'm still going to read papers. I'm still going to watch TV. I'm still going to talk to people. There's still going to be other sites, etc. So no matter what happens, I feel like there's kind of a natural balance that occurs in the world anyway.
I think our job as companies who are innovating in the media space is to satisfy users, not satisfy journalists, not necessarily even satisfy media companies. I say this as part of a large media company. Our job is to disrupt. I mean, if you look at media companies, they have not been innovative. A lot of media companies who are in the print world completely miss the digital world. And I implore them whenever we go and talk to them not to miss the mobile world and not to miss the social world. So I think that we're all in this together. I mean, all of us on stage here want great journalism to happen because that's what feeds our applications. But I think that it's important for media companies to understand that we're all in this together. There's no model right now, and we've got to figure it out.
All right, and on that warning, I'm afraid we have to wrap this up. I could continue this conversation all day, but a big hand for our panelists.